change the will, or Rutland under the grave. My kids interrupted me several times during my husband's will and threatened me to change the will, so I hit record when the lawyer came. You better sign those papers or we'll dig up Dad and get his fingerprint from the grave. That was the first thing my youngest son said to me after we buried Charles. Not, I'm sorry. Not, are you holding up okay, Mom? No. That was the greeting I got. We had just come back from the cemetery, my black dress still damp from kneeling on the dewy ground, the scent of lilies and turned soil still clinging to my sleeves. I was standing in the hallway when Scott cornered me like a debt collector, his eyes sharp and his voice low enough that only I could hear the venom. Before I could process what he'd said, Annette barged in behind him, holding a manila envelope. It's just a minor revision, Mom, she said sweetly, like she was handing me a birthday card. You know Dad wouldn't want things to get complicated. Let's make this smooth for everyone. David stood a few steps behind them both. He did not speak. He never did. Just crossed his arms and watched. Like always. Complicated? I asked, trying to keep my voice from trembling. Your father just died yesterday. You want to talk about money already? Scott stepped closer. We're talking about fairness. You think it's fair to leave everything to that dusty veterans group he loved more than his own kids? I stared at him, and for a brief moment, I did not recognize his face. I saw nothing of Charles in it. No patience, no decency, just hunger. We are your children, Annette added, voice rising slightly. You think you can just give it all away and we'll stay quiet? I walked slowly to the living room and sat on Charles's old recliner, the one that still creaked the same way it had for 40 years. I folded my hands. The edge of my late husband's embroidered handkerchief caught between my fingers. My home is wherever you are, he had stitched into the corner, back when he still had the steadiness to sew. Annette dropped the envelope on the coffee table like she was throwing down a legal threat. You can either sign this or we contest the will, claim diminished capacity, and let a judge decide if you're all there. Scott laughed under his breath. You're not getting any younger, Mom. David, still by the wall, finally spoke. We just want what's fair. I looked at him, my middle son, the one who used to cry when he skinned his knee and now stood in silence while his siblings threatened me. Is this fair, David? I asked. Is this how you repay the woman who raised you? He looked away. Annette's tone turned sharp. Mom, sign the papers, or we will take this as far as it needs to go. Then Scott, with the calm of someone who had rehearsed it, walked up and laid a hand on my shoulder. You do not want to fight us on this, he whispered. We'll ruin you. I stared at the fireplace, where Charles's folded flag rested above the mantel. I could still see the faint imprint of his body on the recliner cushion beside me. I clenched the handkerchief in my palm, feeling the old threads against my skin. I said nothing. Annette scoffed. This is not over. They filed out of the house like lawyers leaving a deposition, cold, efficient. David was the last to leave, his eyes never meeting mine. I sat alone for a long time, the envelope still untouched on the table. The house was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the old kitchen clock. I stood, walked to the bedroom Charles and I had shared for over 50 years, and opened the bottom drawer of his nightstand. Inside was a small wooden box. It held a few medals, an old photograph of us from 1969, and a silver USB drive, one Charles had told me to keep safe. I took it to the laptop he had insisted on keeping despite its age. The screen flickered. Then there he was, my Charles, sitting in his reading chair, wearing that flannel I had mended 3 times, staring directly into the camera. If you're watching this, Liz, he said, his voice steady, then I guess they came for it. I swallowed hard. I want you to know I made this decision with a clear mind. I spoke with the lawyer, the doctor. Everything is legal. I'm leaving everything to you, not because I love our kids less, but because they've shown me who they really are. They lied. They sold land behind my back, they stopped calling, they stopped caring, and I cannot reward betrayal with inheritance. He paused, and I saw his eyes shine for a second. If they threaten you, play this. Loud. Let them hear it from me. He looked down briefly, then back up. You are always the only one who stayed, and I trust you to finish this for me. The screen faded to black. I closed the laptop gently, then returned the USB to its box and locked the drawer. That night, I did not cry, I did not tremble. I placed the handkerchief beneath my pillow and lay in silence, with Charles's voice still echoing in my mind. If they wanted a war, I now had my weapon. The house creaked more at night now. Maybe it was just age settling into the wood, like grief settling into bones. Or maybe it was the silence. The kind that clings to your skin after 50 years of shared footsteps suddenly stop echoing. Charles was gone and the house knew it. I sat in the kitchen that morning, the chair across from me still pushed slightly out from where he used to sit. His coffee mug, plain white with a crack near the handle, was still on the counter. I could not bring myself to wash it. The smell of bacon grease and black coffee had faded from the walls, replaced by something thinner, something hollow. It had once been a house filled with noise, tools clanging in the barn, dogs barking at the morning light, and Charles singing old Johnny Cash songs out of tune while fixing the porch rail. I closed my eyes and let memory carry me back. We were 22 when we bought this land, just a raw patch of dirt with a broken fence and a shed that leaned like it was ashamed to be standing. Charles had looked at it with that twinkle in his eye, the one that said, "I see what it could be." I had no reason to trust anyone back then, not after the way my own family fell apart. But he put the deed in both our names without asking. "It's ours," he said, "not mine, not yours, ours." We slept in the back of a pickup for 3 weeks while we rebuilt the cabin. I hammered until my hands bled. He worked until his back locked up. We laughed through it. One night it stormed so hard the tarp over us flew off and soaked everything, including Charles's only clean socks. I started to cry, but he pulled me in and said, "At least now we smell like the land we own." That stupid line made me laugh until I forgot the cold. Years passed, and we turned that land into a home. Chickens, then cows, then corn. Charles worked at the mill part-time, and I took in mending work. We never had much, but we had each other. When the kids were born, things got harder. We built rooms, not just walls. We grew roots, and slowly we forgot what silence sounded like. But things changed, as they do. The kids grew up, started calling less. First it was school, then work, then life is busy, Mom. I knew the excuses, and I never asked for much. A call every now and then, a visit on Sundays. But as the years went on, the voices stopped filling the kitchen. Charles started forgetting things around his 74th birthday. First it was keys, then names, then whole days. The doctor said it was mild cognitive decline, maybe early-stage dementia, maybe just age. But I knew better. I saw the look in his eyes when he stared at the porch swing and asked who built it. He still smiled, though, still held my hand every evening and said, "You always smell like home." I stayed with him through every forgotten moment. Helped him bathe, helped him eat. I cleaned up the accidents, hid the bills from the kids, because I knew he would have done the same for me. One night after he got lost on the way to the shed and I found him sitting in the field looking at the stars, he whispered, "If I go before you, Liz, everything should go to you." He looked down at the grass and then at me. "Because they love what I have. But you loved who I was." He never said it again, but I knew he meant it. 3 days before his heart surgery, Charles asked me to help him set up the camera in the study. He looked pale, but his mind was sharp. "If anything happens, this video will speak for me," he said. And it did. A few weeks after that, when Charles had a particularly lucid day, we went to town. I helped him into his best shirt, the blue one with the pearl buttons, and drove him to Mr. Robert Blackwell's office. Robert had been our family's lawyer for decades, but more than that, he was Charles's friend, fought with him in Korea, knew his secrets, knew his morals. We sat in Robert's office while Charles spelled out every word he wanted in his will. No confusion, no pressure, just clarity. I remember the way he spoke, firm, like he was holding on to the last solid thing he had. "Leave the house, the land, the bank accounts, all of it, to Liz, and when she's gone, it can go wherever she wants. I trust her." Robert nodded and said it would be drafted that day. Just to be safe, we called Dr. Mason, our town's only doctor, and another man who had known Charles for years. Dr. Mason came to the office, gave Charles a full cognitive screening, and wrote a formal statement on the spot. "Mr. Charles Walker is mentally capable of understanding and signing legal documents as of this date." I still have the signed copy, sealed, witnessed, stamped. That day, after everything was finished, Charles took my hand as we walked back to the car and said, That's my final act of love for you, Liz. They will come for it, but you'll be ready. And now? Now they had come. Like wolves wearing suits. Like children who had mistaken inheritance for affection. The same children who were too busy to call, too tired to visit, too modern to care. I stood in our bedroom and stared at the photo of us on our wedding day. Him in his uniform, me in a borrowed dress. I remembered how his hands shook when he tied my shoes, because I was too pregnant to reach them. I remembered how he held our first child like she was made of glass. I remembered every second he forgot and every second I held on to both our memories for us. He was right. They did not want to remember him. They wanted to erase him, rename his legacy with their signatures, and they thought I would be too weak to stop them. I walked back into the kitchen and picked up his coffee mug, cracked and worn, worthless to anyone else, but I held it like a relic. Then I whispered aloud to the empty house, "Do not worry, Charles. I am ready." I poured fresh coffee, sat in my chair, and wrote down every word they had said to me the day before, every threat, every insult, and beside them I wrote what I would say when the time came. This house may have been quieter now, but it was not empty. Not yet. It was 2 days after the funeral when Annette came knocking again, dressed in charcoal gray and pearls, as if still in mourning, but the gleam in her eye gave her away. I opened the door slowly, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Behind her stood a man I had never seen before, tall, with slicked-back hair and the kind of smile that smelled like commission. He held a leather briefcase and wore a suit too shiny for someone truly successful. "Mom," Annette said brightly, like we had just met for brunch. "This is Mr. Thomas Clay. He's here to help us streamline some paperwork." I said nothing, stepping aside because I had already learned it was easier to let the fox enter the henhouse when you had a trap set. Mr. Clay shook my hand with a practiced grip. "Mrs. Walker, my deepest condolences. Your husband was a great man." "You knew him?" I asked. "Oh, no," he said quickly, "but I've heard wonderful things." I raised my eyebrows but didn't respond. He smelled like eucalyptus and ego. They followed me into the kitchen. I had already prepared the room, tidy, warm, and deceptively innocent. The tea kettle was on the stove. A plate of cornbread sat on the table. But what mattered most was the small brass teapot sitting on the shelf beside the window. Inside, tucked carefully between the leaves of mint tea, was a miniature camera, a gift from Robert Blackwell, who had dropped it off quietly the day before. "This won't take long," Annette said, pulling out a thick folder from her bag. She set it on the table and slid it toward me. "It's just an update. The last will was made under emotional circumstances. We all agree it's time to ensure fairness." Scott came in through the back door without knocking. "You said she'd be ready," he grumbled. "Is she signing or not?" I sat down slowly and stared at the folder as if it were a viper coiled on my table. "What is this?" I asked. "A new will," Annette said with rehearsed ease. "Nothing drastic. Just a few changes to make sure everything is distributed equitably. You'll still keep the house. We're just removing the charity clause and adjusting the percentages." I ran my hand along the edge of the table, letting my fingers rest on the warm ceramic of my teacup. "And why isn't Robert here?" "Oh, come on," Scott barked. "He's practically a relic. This is standard legal procedure. Don't complicate things." Mr. Clay smiled again. "We're here as a courtesy, ma'am. If you'd rather have your attorney review it, we can always return, but your children are just trying to protect your interests. Grief can be disorienting." I leaned forward, picked up the first page, and held it like it might burn me. My hands trembled, partly from nerves, partly from deliberate theater. I let the paper shake. "I don't know if I can read this," I whispered. "It says, 'I give.' What does it say, dear?" I looked to Annette, blinking like I couldn't make out the words. She leaned in with sugar in her voice. "It just says that you're redistributing assets among your children. That's all. We can read it together." I frowned, squinting harder. "So the land goes to David and the livestock to who is S. Walker again?" "That's Scott," Annette said quickly. "Oh, I see. And the savings, who does that go to?" I looked up. Annette hesitated. "To be divided equally. Even with that loan David never repaid?" The air went still for a moment. Scott's jaw tightened. "That's ancient history," I shrugged, then looked at Mr. Clay. "And you're a lawyer. I am a licensed financial consultant who works closely with estate attorneys, meaning you're not a lawyer, I said, more sharply than I had intended. That's what I thought. He cleared his throat. Ma'am, I assure you everything here is legal. Oh, I'm sure it is, I said, softening my voice again. I picked up a pen. My fingers shook visibly as I hovered over the dotted line. I'm not sure I understand, Scott groaned. For God's sake, just sign it. What do you even want with all this land? You're one broken hip away from a nursing home. Annette glared at him, but it was too late. The words were out. I set the pen down and folded my hands. Tell me, Scott, I said gently, when was the last time you brought your children to visit, or called, on Christmas? He looked away. Annette, when was the last time you asked me how I'm sleeping, or what medicine I take? Do you even know what's in the garage? Annette opened her mouth, but I raised a finger. No, don't answer. I already know. I reached for the teapot and poured a slow, steady stream of tea into my cup. This house may be quiet, but it is not empty. Your father is still here, and so is my memory. Scott stepped forward again, this time red in the face. Do not make this difficult. Oh, I won't, I said, because I am not signing anything today, and if you push me further, I will be showing this meeting to my real attorney. I stood up slowly. My knees cracked, but my spine was straight. Now, you can leave, or I can call the sheriff and tell him you brought a stranger into my home to pressure me into rewriting a legal document. Which do you prefer? Mr. Clay gathered his things without a word. Annette's lips were tight, her cheeks flushed. Scott muttered something under his breath, but no one dared repeat it. As they left, I walked to the kitchen shelf, opened the little teapot, and removed the blinking camera. I turned it off and cradled it in my palm like a talisman. My heart was pounding. My hands were cold. But I had done it. I had stared down the wolves and not flinched. Later that evening, I poured myself another cup of tea, this time with shaking hands, for a different reason. I sat by the fireplace and replayed the footage, watching my performance. My trembling fingers, their frustration, Scott's outburst. It was all there, every word, every lie, every manipulation. I would deliver it to Robert the next morning. Let the law see what a mother's grief looks like when cornered by greed. Charles had warned me they would come, and now I had proof, not just of their cruelty, but of my strength. Let them try again. I would be ready. I woke early the next morning, long before the frost on the windows had begun to melt. The sky outside was still dark, and the only sound in the house was the low hum of the old refrigerator. I stood in front of the hallway mirror, fastening the buttons on my faded gray housecoat, my fingers lingering over the top one. In my pocket, tucked into the inner seam, was a small digital voice recorder no bigger than a matchbox. Robert had lent it to me the night before. If they come again, he'd said, let them talk. But this time, let the law listen too. So I did what I had done every morning of my married life. I brushed my hair back into a bun, tied my apron, and put on a kettle. But this time, my hands were steady. I had a weapon now, not made of bullets or threats, but one of memory, one Charles would have respected. By noon, they returned. Scott entered first, holding the door open for Annette like they were arriving at a hotel, not their late father's home. She wore heels too tall for my wooden floor and perfume that didn't belong to a grieving daughter. Mom, she said crisply, we thought we'd check in one last time, give you a chance to do the right thing before we move forward. Just us today, Scott added, tossing his coat over the chair like he owned it. Thought it'd be better without Mr. Clay. Less pressure, more family. Family. The words scraped across my spine. I nodded politely, offered them tea, and sat at the far end of the kitchen table, the voice recorder already running in my pocket. I had slipped it on the moment I heard their tires crunch across the gravel driveway. Annette got straight to the point. Here's what we're thinking. You keep the house. One car, the rest we split evenly, land, investments, all of it. We'll even handle the paperwork and fees. You won't have to lift a finger. Scott leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Look, we're not trying to be cruel. We just want our share, and if you drag this out, things could get uncomfortable. I tilted my head slightly. Uncomfortable? He smiled, but there was no kindness in it. You live alone, Mom. Winter's coming. What happens if the heater goes out and no one's there to fix it? Or if the road freezes over and you slip getting the mail? Annette added, we worry about you, truly, but if you won't let us help, We'll have to petition the court for power of attorney. Then we can make the changes on your behalf." I sipped my tea and said nothing, let the silence hang like a curtain. That was when Scott's voice dropped, low and vicious. "If you don't sign, we'll leave you here to rot. You'll die in this house, and no one will even know until the smell leaks through the floorboards." Annette flinched, but she did not stop him. He kept going. "You think you're clever, hoarding Dad's money like some dragon? We'll burn every trace of him if we have to, his medals, his grave. You hear me? If I don't see a dime, I swear I'll dig up his body and toss it to the dogs." My grip tightened on the teacup, but I stayed silent. I did not let them see my hands shake. I looked past them, at the worn patch of wallpaper above the stove where Charles had once scribbled the measurements for a new kitchen shelf. He never built it. He got sick before he could finish, but he left the numbers there, like a promise, and I thought to myself, let the walls remember this. Let every word be a nail in their own coffin. Scott stood up. "Enough talk. Sign the papers, or we go to court tomorrow." I smiled then. A soft, slow smile, the kind I used to give Charles after a particularly good hand of cards. "I'll think about it," I said gently. "You should go now." Annette hesitated. "Mom, we're trying to—" I said, "I'll think about it." They left in silence this time. No slamming doors, no curses. Just the sound of disappointment muffled by polished shoes on old floorboards. When they were gone, I waited until the driveway was empty before reaching into my pocket and pulling out the recorder. I rewound it, pressed play, and let the venom pour from its tiny speaker. Scott's voice was crisp, clear. "If you don't sign, we'll leave you here to rot. I swear I'll dig up his body and toss it to the dogs." I closed my eyes, hearing Charles in my mind. Not his anger. He was never one for rage, but his calm certainty. "Let them speak," he'd told me once, back when we were young and battling a neighbor who tried to claim part of our fence line. "The truth always knows the way home." Before I turned off the device, I looked up at the ceiling, at the faded paint and the dangling chain of the overhead light, and I whispered, so quiet it barely stirred the air, "If you can still hear me, Charles, let the truth speak for me now." Then I stood, walked to the back bedroom, and placed the recorder in the same wooden box as the USB. 2 weapons, and soon they would both be heard. The next morning I bundled up in my heaviest coat, slipped the USB and voice recorder into a cloth pouch, and locked the house behind me. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I made my way to the car, the air thick with frost. I drove with both hands clutching the wheel and my mind focused on only one destination, the law office of Robert Blackwell. Robert had been Charles's closest friend for more than 5 decades. They met in Korea, both barely men then, but already brothers in some unspoken way. Over the years, their friendship aged like good whiskey, quiet, strong, and always waiting when it mattered most. Charles trusted him, and now I had no choice but to do the same. When I walked into the reception area, Robert's assistant looked up with a startled smile. "Mrs. Walker," she said, standing, "he's expecting you." Robert's office had barely changed since the 90s. Same leather chairs, same ticking grandfather clock in the corner, same faint smell of cedar and pipe tobacco, even though he had quit smoking years ago. He stood when I entered, tall and solid, his gray hair combed neatly, his tie crooked like always. "Liz," he said with a small nod, "you look like hell." I smiled weakly. "Good, that's how I feel." He motioned me into the chair across from him. "What happened?" I placed the pouch on his desk and unwrapped it with slow, deliberate care. "They came back," I said, "with a fake will, a phony lawyer, and a handful of threats." I set the USB on the wood. Charles was right. They didn't waste a day. Robert took the drive and the recorder in his large hands, then looked at me. "Did they pressure you to sign anything?" "They tried. I played dumb, I stalled, I recorded everything. It's all there, the threats, the manipulation, Scott talking about digging up Charles's grave, Annette trying to rewrite the will, behind closed doors." He slid on his reading glasses and leaned back. "And the original will?" "In your files," I said. "And this?" I pulled out the doctor's letter, still folded neatly in the envelope Charles had asked me to hide. Charles passed his mental competency evaluation the same day he signed the will. Witnessed, verified. Robert opened the letter, read it silently, then let out a long breath. "This," he said, "is airtight." He turned to his computer and began typing. "We're going to prepare a complete file, hard copy and digital. We'll notarize everything, timestamp it, and keep multiple backups. If they try anything, we will be 3 steps ahead." I watched him work for a moment. There was a calmness to Robert, the kind that only men like him possessed, the kind forged in war, hardened in courtrooms, and softened by old friendships. "I do not want revenge," I said after a few minutes. "I just want peace. But they won't let me have it." Robert looked up. "Then we give them something they cannot twist, evidence, and we let the law do what it was meant to do." He plugged the USB into his laptop, opened the video, and we watched Charles appear on screen once more. The lighting was dim, the background plain, but his voice rang out clear and unmistakable. "If you're watching this, it means they came for it." I sat in silence while Robert listened, arms folded across his chest. He never interrupted, not even when Charles's voice cracked in the middle, not even when the camera shook slightly from the weight of truth. When the video ended, Robert removed his glasses and wiped them slowly with a cloth. "That man," he said, "knew exactly what he was doing. And so do you." "I never wanted this," I whispered. "No one ever does," he replied, "but it came anyway. And Charles left you more than just money. He left you the means to protect yourself." He leaned forward. "Here is what we do. I will draft a letter of legal warning, citing the original will, the video testimony, the competency evaluation, and the audio recording. We will send it to each of your children with an official notice of cease and desist. Any further attempt to coerce you will be considered elder abuse under Tennessee law. If they push, we sue. Publicly." I blinked. "You think they'll stop?" Robert shrugged. "Some people turn tail when they see the barrel of a lawsuit. Others don't know they've lost until they're standing in front of a judge. Either way, we do not wait for their next move. We make ours first." He opened a new folder on his desk and began organizing the materials. "I will also request an injunction from the court to prohibit them from entering your property or contacting you directly." I nodded, but something in me hesitated. "They are still my children, Robert." He softened then. "I know. But they chose what they became. That does not mean you stop loving them, but it does mean you stop letting them hurt you." His words sat with me like warm stones. I sat back in the leather chair, suddenly tired, suddenly fragile. "I'm not used to being the one who fights," I said. Robert gave a half smile. "You already fought, Liz. You just did it with grace. Now let me handle the rest." We spent the next 2 hours assembling every piece of proof, printing legal documents and organizing them into labeled binders. Robert made backup copies and stored them in a locked drawer. He even gave me a flash drive to carry on my keychain, just in case. Before I left, he walked me to the car. The sun had finally broken through the clouds, casting pale gold light over the quiet street. "You're not alone," he said, hand on the car door. "And you're not powerless." I looked at him, old friend of my husband, and whispered, "Thank you." Robert nodded. "For Charles, and for you." As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, at the law office behind me. It looked small from a distance, but I knew the truth now. Justice does not need to be loud to be strong. I went home with papers in my bag, resolve in my bones, and the sound of Charles's voice still ringing in my heart. Let them come. I was not afraid anymore. They came back on a Thursday. No call, no warning, just the slamming of car doors and the echo of boots on the porch. I had just finished sweeping the hallway when I saw them through the front window. Scott in a navy blazer 2 sizes too tight, Annette holding a folder like a weapon, and David trailing behind with a face as gray as the sky. They did not knock. They barged in like they still lived there, like this house did not reek of their betrayal. "You forced our hand, Mom," Annette said sharply. "We're done playing nice." Scott didn't wait for pleasantries. "We have already spoken to a lawyer. If you keep pushing this fantasy, we'll take you to court ourselves." I stood at the end of the dining table, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "On what grounds?" Scott sneered. "Mental manipulation, elder abuse. We'll tell the judge you pressured Dad into writing that will while he was already slipping." "You're accusing me," I said slowly, "of coercing my husband while he was ill?" David mumbled. "You isolated him. You didn't let us help." "You never tried," I snapped. "Not once." Annette raised her voice, her cheeks flushed. You want to die alone in this house with your dusty memories? Fine, but you don't get to take everything with you. We're not leaving empty-handed. Then Scott stepped forward, eyes blazing. We'll tell the local paper everything. We'll say you took advantage of a confused old man. They'll eat it up. Headlines, photos. You think you'll survive that? Tragedy turns to scandal real fast. His words didn't shake me, not this time. I walked to the hutch and opened the small wooden drawer. From it, I retrieved a slim black device and returned to the table without a word. I placed it gently on the wood. The light blinked red. Annette took a half-step back. What's that? I sat down, centered the recorder, and pressed play. The room filled with their own voices, sharp, vile, inescapable. If you don't sign, we'll leave you here to rot. I swear, I'll dig up his body and toss it to the dogs. We'll bury you before you bury the money. The sound of my silence between their threats was louder than anything they said. David turned pale. Annette's jaw twitched as she stared at the table. Scott's face turned red, but not from shame, only fury. He lunged forward, arm raised, hand stretched toward the recorder like he meant to crush it. But before he could touch it, a calm voice cut through the air. That would be considered destruction of evidence, Mr. Walker. All three of them froze. From behind the hallway curtain, Robert Blackwell stepped out, suit pressed, expression unreadable. He carried a folder under one arm and a heavy badge of truth in the other. Scott stumbled backward, his bravado crumbling. You set us up? No, Robert said, walking to stand beside me. You set yourselves up. Mrs. Walker simply gave you the rope. You tied the noose. Annette's eyes filled with panic. This isn't legal. We didn't know we were being recorded in the state of Tennessee, Robert said smoothly. Only one party needs to be aware of an audio recording for it to be admissible in court, and that party was your mother. He opened his folder and removed a letter, sliding it across the table toward them. This is a cease and desist order, signed by Judge Wallace this morning. Any further attempt to intimidate or defraud Mrs. Walker will result in formal charges. You are no longer allowed on this property without her written consent. No one spoke, not even David. I looked at each of them, my children, my flesh, my heartbreak, and felt nothing, not rage, not sorrow, just stillness. You came here to finish me, I said, voice low, but all you did was finish yourselves. Scott muttered something foul and turned on his heel. Annette hesitated, her mouth moving but no words coming. David looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in years, and then followed them out the door. Robert waited until the sound of their car faded down the gravel drive before turning to me. You all right? He asked gently. I nodded once. Better than I've been in a long time. We stood there for a moment in silence, surrounded by dust, truth, and the ghost of Charles's steady hand resting on my shoulder. They won't stop here, I said quietly. No, Robert agreed, but now you're not alone, and they know you're not weak. I picked up the recorder, held it in my palm, and felt its tiny weight. Charles had once said, let them speak. The truth always finds its voice. Now it had. The courtroom was cold, the kind of cold that sank into your bones and made you feel smaller than you were. I sat at the front, hands folded in my lap, that old handkerchief with Charles's embroidery tucked between my fingers. My home is wherever you are. I could still feel the worn stitching brushing against my palm, as if his hand rested there, steadying me. Scott, Annette, and David sat a few feet away, lined up like schoolchildren awaiting discipline. Their lawyer, a slick-talking man in an expensive suit, was already sweating through his collar. The judge, a stern woman named Evelyn Wallace, entered the courtroom with the calm authority of someone who had seen too many families torn apart over too little truth. Robert stood tall beside me, files in hand, his glasses perched on the edge of his nose. We are here today to affirm the validity of the last will and testament of Charles Walker, Judge Wallace began, scanning the room, and to address allegations brought by the plaintiffs, his children, regarding coercion, mental incompetence, and fraudulent exclusion. Robert stepped forward and began in his calm, deliberate voice. Your Honor, what we have before us is not just a legal dispute. It is an effort to undo the final, conscious, and lawfully prepared wishes of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. He turned to the courtroom technician. With your permission, I'd like to submit into evidence a recorded video made by Mr. Walker 2 weeks before his passing. The judge nodded. Proceed. The lights dimmed slightly as the screen lit up, and there he was. Charles, sitting in his favorite reading chair, wearing that blue flannel shirt I had folded so many times. His voice filled the courtroom, quiet but resolute. "If you're watching this, it means they've tried to take what I've left behind." He paused, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered, but the clarity in them unmistakable. "Let me be clear. I am of sound mind. I've passed every medical evaluation. I know exactly who I am, and I know what they've done." The courtroom held its breath. "I am leaving everything to Liz because she was with me through the hardest years, because while my children were busy chasing dollars, she was wiping my mouth, tying my shoes, and keeping me from slipping into the dark." He leaned forward. "I am also doing this because Scott, Annette, and David made a decision without my knowledge or consent. They sold 2 acres of jointly owned land last year, land with my name on the title. No phone call, no conversation. Just forged paperwork and a wire transfer I found by accident. That's not a misunderstanding. That's betrayal." He took a breath, voice tight. "So if they cry foul, remind them. They weren't cut out of the will, they cut themselves out." The video ended. Silence swept the room like a funeral bell. The judge turned to Robert. "Do you have medical verification to support Mr. Walker's competency at the time of that recording?" Robert handed her the original signed evaluation from Dr. Mason, complete with time-stamped documentation and 2 witnesses. "And the original will? Filed, sealed, and witnessed under oath," Robert replied. "And as additional evidence, we have a full audio recording of the defendants attempting to coerce Mrs. Walker into signing a falsified will." He placed the recorder on the table. The judge pressed play. Once again their words filled the room. "If you don't sign, we'll leave you here to rot. I swear I'll dig up his body and toss it to the dogs. We'll bury you before you bury the money." David covered his face with his hands. Annette looked down at her lap, unmoving. Scott stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, but I saw his fingers twitch against his thigh. When the tape stopped, Judge Wallace spoke. Her voice was calm, final. "It is the opinion of this court that the will presented is legal, binding, and was executed without coercion. Mr. Charles Walker demonstrated full cognitive awareness at the time of its creation, and all documents were verified by medical professionals and legal witnesses." Robert filed an emergency motion with the probate court to freeze any property transfers until the matter could be resolved. "They may scream loud," he said, "but we'll speak with proof." She turned her gaze toward the 3 of them. "Furthermore, this court finds that the plaintiffs acted in bad faith by attempting to present altered documentation and pressure the defendant into surrendering her legal rights. Their conduct, as recorded, constitutes an attempt to defraud and intimidate a surviving spouse, an act this court takes seriously." Annette blinked rapidly, her chin trembling. "Effective immediately," the judge continued, "this court issues a no-contact order between the plaintiffs and Mrs. Liz Walker. Any violation will be considered criminal harassment. The plaintiffs are to pay damages for defamation, legal fees, and emotional distress, and they are permanently removed from any future claims to the estate." Scott let out a sound like a deflating balloon and sank into his chair. His face collapsed, not in rage, but in something more dangerous. Shame. Annette buried her face in her hands and wept silently, her shoulders trembling. David looked as though he had aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. Scott jumped to his feet, shouting, "This is all a setup! That video is fake!" But the judge slammed her gavel. "One more outburst and I will hold you in contempt of court." Silence returned to the room like a slap. But I sat tall, back straight, shoulders square. One hand rested on the table, the other clenched around Charles's handkerchief. I did not smile, I did not cry. My eyes filled, not from grief, but from something deeper. Justice. For every night I had sat alone by Charles's bedside, for every time I had washed his blood sugar monitor, for every insult they hurled at me in the dark, now the truth stood in the light. I closed my eyes and whispered, without moving my lips, "You were right, Charles," and they heard you. The day after the verdict, I woke to the sound of birds tapping gently on the window pane, as if the world itself was giving me permission to breathe again. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I didn't feel the weight of dread pressing on my chest. There was no court date, no knock at the door, no shadow in the hallway whispering threats behind fake smiles. It was quiet, but it was no longer empty. I slipped on my housecoat and walked barefoot across the wooden floor, pausing at the door to the kitchen. The air smelled like dust and something older, peace perhaps, or the remnants of grace. I opened every window in the house, one by one, letting in the late morning light. The breeze fluttered the curtains like fingers running gently across piano keys. In the kitchen, I pulled open the wide double windows and stood at the sink, looking out over the back pasture. The land was golden now, sloping and rich, the same as it had been since we bought it all those years ago. The swing Charles built still hung from the pecan tree. The laundry line still swayed in the wind. I sat at the table, across from the chair he always claimed, and reached for the little wooden box we kept in the pantry, where we stored all the things we couldn't bear to throw away. Inside were his dog tags, his wedding band from Korea, a dried rose from our 40th anniversary, and one envelope, yellowed at the edges, with my name on the front in Charles's slanted, careful handwriting. I unfolded it slowly, already knowing it would smell faintly of cedar and tobacco. Liz, if you're reading this, it means I've gone first, like I always promised I would. That was always the deal, wasn't it? You stay with me through every storm, and I make sure you don't face the end alone. I suppose this letter is my last way of keeping that promise. You were the reason I lived decent. You were the voice in my head when I wanted to quit, the hand on my back when I couldn't lift my own weight. You loved me when I was poor, sick, mean, and stubborn. You never left, even when they did. If they came after you for what I left, know that I saw it coming. They forgot who you are. They thought you were soft. But I know better. I've seen the steel in your spine when the world tried to break you. You didn't just love me. You taught me what loving really meant. If you're holding this, then it means you fought, and I hope you won. I hope you looked them in the eye and reminded them who built this house, who bled for it, who stayed. You were always my victory. But today I hope you get to feel like yours too. Love you always, Charles, I pressed, the paper to my chest, and let the silence hold me. No tears came, just warmth, slow and full, rising through me like the light pouring through the windows. I was not angry anymore. I was not even sad. I was whole. That afternoon I drove into town, parked in front of the courthouse, walked up the steps, and filled out the forms that would give birth to something bigger than vengeance, purpose. I used a portion of the estate Charles left me, not out of spite, but out of truth, and founded the Charles Walker Trust for Dignity. It was built for people like me, for seniors like Mr. Howard, who hadn't seen his son in 8 years, for Miss Jean, who had been feeding stray cats because no one brought her groceries anymore, for people who had given everything, only to grow old and be told they were in the way. Within a month, the old post office building was renovated, painted in fresh cream and sage green. A new sign was nailed to the front door in bold black letters, the Charles Walker Trust for Dignity. Property doesn't reward the good, but justice will. On opening day, a few curious neighbors stopped by. Some brought pies, some brought donations. Some just wanted to talk. I made coffee in the back room and sat near the window, watching the light hit the desk we had placed beside the door. An elderly woman with a frayed shawl came in near closing. She looked nervous, clutching a cloth bag to her chest. I recognized the look in her eyes. It was the same one I had worn for too many years. Guilt for needing help, pride choking the voice that asked for it. She stood quietly by the door before she finally spoke. I heard what you did, Mrs. Walker. I thought maybe you'd be spending the money on a cruise or something, maybe rest. You earned it. I smiled gently and shook my head. I already went on vacation once. And now, with every elderly woman I help, it feels like I'm repaying that moment, not in dollars, but in dignity. She looked confused. You did? I nodded, eyes misting, not with sadness, but with something softer. Yes. The day Charles woke up after his heart surgery and looked at me like I was the whole world, that was the only vacation I ever needed. She smiled back, and for a moment, neither of us felt old. I walked her to the desk and helped her fill out a form for heating assistance. When she left, she touched my hand and whispered, "Thank you for not forgetting what it feels like." After she walked out into the fading afternoon light, I sat back down, letting the quiet settle once more. The house would still creak at night, the bed would still be too big. But now, the silence had changed. It no longer sounded like absence, it sounded like peace. Justice was not loud, it did not march, it did not shout. Sometimes, it simply waited, soft and steady inside a letter, a handkerchief, and the quiet courage of a woman who refused to be erased. And when the world asked what I did with the fortune they fought over, I would point to the front door and say, I gave it back to the ones who never asked for anything, just like Charles would have. And that was my story. Not just about loss, or betrayal, or even justice, but about love that endured beyond a grave and dignity that refused to die in silence. If this story touched your heart, or reminded you of someone brave like Liz, then I invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories for more powerful, emotional, and true-to-life stories just like this one, told from the voices of women who have lived, fought, and loved through the storms life brings. Because here, every wrinkle holds a memory, and every story deserves to be heard.